Hello, everybody, and welcome to Democrats of Greater Tucson. It's a wonderful day, and we're just delighted to have all of you here. My name is Larry Bodine, and I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson. And in a minute, I'll introduce our speaker, Margo Cowan, public defender, but she's on the call today. Hey, Margo, how you doing?
Very well. Hello, everyone.
I love the blue hand. Was that the blue wave?
The blue wave.
Yeah, that's what we want to see. All right, we have a couple of quick announcements. Let's turn to Kathy Ramich White, our membership director.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see you signing up. I am telling you, after the last meeting, or rather, yes, I guess it was just after the last meeting, I looked up a number of you, and you've been coming to the meetings, and that's good, but you still haven't joined. So come on, loosen up those purse strings. Let's go ahead, go to the DGT.org, sign in and join. It's only $20, and you can tell this is a cool place to be a part of. So it's easy, and we'd love you to be members with us. Thanks a lot. Larry, back to you.
All right, thanks very much. Turning now to Sandy Binion, our program director. Sandy, what have you got coming up for us in the future meetings?
I wanted to say thank you, Margo, for coming on, and thank you, staff, who I worked with to arrange this. Coming up next week, we have Mark Gismel, who is the director of the Pima County Housing Center, followed by Steve Kovacek, who is the present city council member from Ward 6 and is now running for re-election. Following him, we're going to have Tim Seller, a reporter from the Daily Star, and the week after that, Juan Hedris, who is running as a candidate for Ward 3. So tune in. We have lots of good speakers coming up after that too. I hope to see you all.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandy. It's always great to hear all the speakers you've worked on. Let's see, and I believe we have an announcement from Shirley Muni. Go ahead, Shirley.
Hi. One more time, this is next Monday. Great Decisions is having a program with a speaker on right-wing populist movements in Western Europe. As you know, some countries already have right-wing governments, and others are trying to have right-wing governments, including Great Britain. So we need to talk about how this is occurring, and also how whether or not COVID is affecting the politics and these right-wing politics in Europe. This is Monday, 2 o'clock. You'll be able to attend Great Decisions first. DGT first. Your reservations have to be in by Sunday the 18th. In order to be effective, you'll be notified of a Zoom link. This is a Zoom webinar. It does cost $10, but we hope it's going to be worth your while. I will put the link in the chat, but it is dgt.org.
No, it's not dgt.org.
TGDA. I get them reversed. TGDA stands for Tucson Great Decisions Association.org. I'm sorry about that. I'm still waking up and have my coffee here. I'll get that into the chat.
All right. Thanks so much, Shirley. We also have an announcement from Lucy Messing. Lucy, tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I am now involved with the Arizona List. And they're the organization that works to elect pro-choice women and have done an amazing job getting some of our folks elected. Anyway, they are having many workshops ongoing. And the next one has to do with fundraising and campaign finance that is taking place this Wednesday. Let me just double check the time. 6:30 to 8. And if you go to arizonalist.org, you can get the link and the information, but then you can also see all the other workshops that they're doing throughout the season to prepare candidates for either campaign managers, candidates themselves, fundraising, all that kind of stuff. So that's this Wednesday, 6:30 to 8. And I'll put the arizonalist.org in the chat for folks. Okay?
All right,
Thank you.
super. Thanks very much. Arizona List is a fabulous organization, so I'm glad to see you're involved in it. Okay, let's turn to our speaker now. We have Margo Cowan here. And let me start by asking you a question. Did you know that last year in Pima County, 18,000 families went to deportation proceedings alone without a lawyer? And you can guess what happened. 98% of the families were deported. Margo Cowan would like to change that. She is a Pima County public defender, and today she is looking for your support for an initiative called Pima County Justice for All. The hope is to get it on the 2022 ballot. It would aim to appoint an attorney for indigent families in Pima County that are going through deportation proceedings. Margo specializes in criminal defense law, and in those courts, indigent people are entitled to have a lawyer appointed to represent them. Margo also specializes in immigration law and has a master's in social work. She was counsel to the Tohono O'odham Nation's chair for 10 years, and she was served as counsel to Congressman Raul Grijalva. And she was co-founder of No More Deaths, No Mas Muertes in 2014, and of the Sanctuary Movement in the 1980s. And with that, Margo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You know, it's a great honor to be with you again. I think that I was with you when you were still meeting at the small restaurant over here, just the other side of I-10, last March or so, maybe even in February of last year, to talk about the initiative. And then we had to shut it down. This is something that I think is way past due. Immigration proceedings are administrative matters, and as such, folks have a right to be represented by counsel, but not at government expense. And by that government, it means not at federal government expense. And you know, the figures that you just heard Larry repeat are shocking. About 65% of the cases that are represented by attorneys are successful, and about 3% where people go by themselves are not. And that means that 97% of the cases that go by themselves, our families, our neighbors, are ordered removed. And those families are torn apart. You know, before the pandemic, we had a clinic at Pueblo High School every Thursday night through a community clinic that I supervised called Keep Tucson Together. Some of you might have heard of it or even come and volunteered. And we regularly had people come that would say things like, well, I went to court and I got this letter from the judge and I don't know what it means. Could you read it to me? And it would be a final order of removal. And that person had just been going about their business, taking kids to school, going to work, going to church, and at any time could have been nabbed and deported. We had some U of A scholars come to the clinic and interview a good cross-section of our clients. Presently, we represent about 820 or 30 Pima County families in removal proceedings. And they did a study, and one fact that just jumps out at me that I want to share is that the study revealed the average length of residency in Pima County for these folks who were in removal proceedings was 16 and a half years. So not that we shouldn't provide support to new arrivals, because I obviously think we should, but the vast majority of people under the previous administration that were in removal proceedings were people who had been here for a long, long time. You know, the last time there was any kind of legalization was 1986. And most of the families that we see are what we call blended families. One of the spouses is either a citizen or a lawful permanent resident. The other is without papers. A lot of U.S. citizen kids. Some families have DACA kids. The older kids are DACA kids. But these are the people that were put in removal. And, you know, we're very proud of the fact that when we get into those cases, and these are all volunteer lawyers that represent at this moment through our clinic to represent these folks, you know, we're very successful. And if it comes to a point where we can't go to the Board of Immigration Appeals or to the Ninth Circuit or somewhere else to fight the case, then there's always a faith-based community in Tucson that will protect the family until history changes a bit. And we've had several people that have been in private sanctuary during all of the years of the last administration, which, as you can imagine, is something that's very difficult. I'm always shocked that as a criminal defense lawyer, if someone is facing deprivation of liberty, and what's that mean? Well, it means if you shoplift or you you disturb the peace, you commit some other minor crime, and you're sentenced to even one day in jail, you have a right to a court-appointed lawyer if you're poor and you can't hire one. But if you're in immigration proceedings and you're poor and you can't hire a lawyer, you're not entitled to have one. And so you have people in immigration court who have relief from removal. In other words, they have applications that they could make that would either make them be permanent resident aliens, lawfully admitted, or would let them stay here for other reasons. And they have no idea what those are. I dare say that if I passed out some of these forms to you all, it would be a real challenge to fill them in. So I don't think that's right. It's just not right. And around the country, there are some programs, some cities and counties that provide public defenders to represent folks in deportation proceedings, but nowhere has it been institutionalized. So, for example, New York City, New York State, after, you all probably remember when Nixon began to dismantle the war on poverty, one of the first things that was restricted was what legal aid societies could do. Because prior to that time, legal aid societies were very, very effective representing farm workers and all sorts of folks. And that really began to dismantle the legal aid society. Well, at that point, New York State decided all of the things that the legal aid society had done that were beneficial to New York folk, including immigration representation, should continue, whether or not the federal government funds them or not. And so the state began to fund all sorts of, tenant-landlord disputes and custody stuff and immigration defense. And other cities, and no other states, but other cities and counties have followed over the years and sporadically put together defense offices. But what's wrong with that model, and I mean, it's great that people are represented, but what's wrong with the model is something that we saw this last funding cycle as a result of COVID. And that was that New York's resources were needed for other things. There were other priorities. And so after all these years, it was a down to the wire battle to fund the immigration defense work done by the cities and the counties in New York because of a shortage of state funds. And And so I think really the way that this is resolved, in the beginning, I started working on this in 2017, actually with my dear friend, rest in peace, Richard Elias. He and I kind of cooked up an idea to see if we could get the Board of Supervisors to create the Office of Non-Citizen Defense and make it part of the Public Defender and our conflict officers department and fund it through the county. And we were one vote short. And then we began to think, and we began to look at the model of going through voter created legislation. Because the only way that this can be undone once we're successful is for someone to do an initiative to shut the office and deny funding. So it really institutionalizes the right to counsel for indigent Pima County families who are in removal proceedings. And we decided that we should go for the gold medal and not just try and sort of have a year or two of charity funding from the board. So we began, the late summer, fall of 2019 to organize a campaign. And then of course, in the spring, Richard passed, the spring of 2020, Richard passed, and also the pandemic crashed upon us. So we spent the time really all last summer up into the fall, like doing the analysis of all the Pima County precincts for the last 15 years, voting patterns, and we chose particular races and that kind of thing. And we created a 100 precinct priority list to begin to focus on. And we started collecting signatures, a month, 6 weeks ago. Obviously being very, very careful, masking and gloving and all that kind of stuff, but not able to engage in the way that one usually runs a campaign. Usually goes door to door, usually goes to big events, all of that kind of stuff. We had to figure it out other ways. So recently what we've been doing is having drive-bys, usually in church parking lots, and asking churches to put out to their congregation. We'll be like at St. Mark's Presbyterian or Grace State Paul Episcopal on such and such a day. Please come by and sign the petition. And we have like pens in baggies. So we give everybody a pen, and then they sign the petition, they keep the pen. We're doing that kind of thing. We leaflet through the neighborhood ahead of time and all the precincts around the church, letting people know that that's what we're doing and asking them to come out and drive by. Lately, people have been coming out as we've been leaving those leaflets and wanting to talk about the initiative. So we're beginning to think we're hesitant, and we certainly don't want to offend anybody, but we're beginning to think that we might be able to actually go back to a door-to-door model. We're thinking about maybe leafleting, just a no contact leaflet that says, we're going to come back by Saturday. If you are comfortable, we would like you to respond and sign the petition. If you're not comfortable, we have a table in front of so-and-so's house and the address a couple of blocks over, and we invite you to come over. And people are taking petitions who have contact with in their own circles, like folks that are still working, or some churches have begun service, so people that are going to church and other groups. So we're starting off slow. We have until, I think it's July 7th of 2021 to file 58,000 signatures. Now we'd like to file closer to 80,000 because for a couple of reasons. You all know that when you get a signature, that's really when you're convincing the voter to support the initiative. And so we want to get out to as many people as possible the message that we think it's a matter of fundamental justice, that our neighbors, everybody, there hasn't been a legalization since 1986. And so what that means is that everybody knows somebody, whether it's their neighbor, whether their kids play together, whether they go to their church, whether they work where they work. Everybody knows somebody who's out of status. And when our clinic was up and running, the whole world would come and see me. And some people would just be straight up and say, well, here's so-and-so, and what can we do to help them, and that kind of thing. We would have judges that I practice in front of, doctors, police officers, and they sort of start, well, so-and-so kind of has this problem. They don't really have papers. Can you help us? But the bottom line, and the reason I'm sharing this is everybody knows somebody. And so when we are going now to collect our signatures, we want to remind everybody that everybody knows somebody. And all those somebodies that everybody knows deserves to be represented by counsel if they're ever put in a deportation proceeding. And so that's our message. It seems like November, well, maybe it doesn't seem like you all are veteranos, you're all veterans of the political wars. But in some regards, it seems like, July 2021 that's a long way away, you'll get it. But it's not a long way away, that time flies by. And our goal to get 22,000 more than is required is a lot. So we need all the help we can get, and we appreciate everybody's help. I think that Marta has put in the chat like where our office is and the Facebook stuff and all that kind of thing. And if you call, we're glad to figure out how to get you petitions. We would very much like everybody's help. We've been saying to folks, well, we'll take a petition or 10, we'll take one. And if you just know 8 or 10 people in the circle of folks that you still see, registered voters in Pima County, please get them to sign it. So we're doing it that way. It doesn't bother us a bit if, you take a petition with 15 lines on it and you bring it back and it has 8 or 9, that's fine with us. Whatever everybody's comfortable with, because we understand that we have to ease into doing this. But, it's really important. It's really important. We can't continue to let folks go to immigration court and have these families torn apart. We just can't. And it became, during Biden's administration, I anticipate that pretty quick they're going to close a lot of these cases, administratively close them, as President Obama did. And hopefully we can get some immigration reform in the summertime. I'm confident that we will, actually. But that doesn't mean that next go around, we won't have an administration like the one that we just had. And then those families continue to be in jeopardy. And as kids grow up and the parents become older, then we're talking about, our community elders that are susceptible to deportation because they're out of status. So this is a really, really important piece of work. We enjoy great support from our elected officials. Regina, Congresswoman Kirkpatrick, Raul, most of the city council, Adelita, school board people, elected officials understand this issue because they're the ones that field the questions about where can I get some help? And they understand the issue. The faith-based community understands the issue. Schools understand the issue. I can't tell you how many teachers have come forward, people that work in elementary schools, and say, I have a little boy in my class whose parents were deported, and I'm doing everything I can to support his aunt who's taking care of him. We're not just talking about food and clothes. We're talking about a baby who's been devastated because his parents have been deported. Terrible, terrible stuff. So that's what we're doing. And I sure would like to have all of you jump on the boat and help us out. Do anything you can. Endorse the campaign. If people feel like maybe not now, but at some point in the future, you'd have a gathering somewhere, maybe in your house, maybe in your yard, maybe in a park, wherever. Any kind of organizing activities that folks are willing to do. We need all the help that we can get. So let me take any questions or concerns if anybody has concerns about what I've said.
Shirley, you posted a question in the chat. Would you like to ask Margo live?
I just read that Chief Magnus in Tucson has been nominated by President Biden to head the Customs and Border Patrol. Gets confirmed by the Senate. What kind of results do you expect from that?
I think it's exciting. I think it's great. It's great. I imagine that he will get a lot of resistance from the rank and file. And hopefully the ones that resist will leave the service. That would be the best solution so that he can, at least in the time that he has in this first term, try and change the culture of ICE and the Border Patrol. Now, there's a huge backlog of cases in the courts. And so I think that we should anticipate, hopefully in the next month or so, that the administration will issue a priority list of cases that should be administratively closed, just as President Obama did. And that's great. But if there's not legalization, I hope before the August recess, then those people, although their cases are admin closed, they're not out of jeopardy. If they stay closed, we had cases under this past administration that were closed in Obama's term that will reopen. And so I hope that we'll take a little pressure out of the current situation with actions that the president can take and with a reconfiguration of ICE and Border Patrol. But if things get okay for today, that doesn't mean they're going to be okay tomorrow. And we just have to remember that. I mean, I could tell you terrible horror stories about the way that folks were treated during the last administration. You can guess it. I don't have to tell you what that is. So we have to prepare as if it was for the worst.
Okay. John Yocum, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
And everybody should probably sign this position, even if you don't agree with it, so that it goes on the ballot. Then we can all get the chance, at least, to decide if this is the way to go or not the way to go. I've already signed it. But also, Margo, I think you mentioned a deadline of 2021. The deadline is supposed to be 2022 in July.
Okay, we have a question from Lynn Hudson. Lynn, go right ahead.
Thanks. Margo, just a couple of thoughts. It might be a good source, Casa Alitas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a volunteer at Casa Alitas, and I don't know if you've contacted the folks at Casa Alitas, but those would certainly be sympathetic folks who might be willing to take some petitions, thank you, and collect signatures for you. So that was one of my thoughts. I don't know if you've done that already. And then you said there were thousands of people who went unrepresented and very few were successful. Have you explored the possibility of training some bright people who might go in to fill in where you don't have enough people with legal training?
Yeah, thank you for both those questions. So I do legal train briefings with the folks at Casalitas.
Uh-huh.
And I usually go Tuesday and Thursday at noon and brief the folks about what to expect when they are called into immigration and that kind of thing. So I certainly will talk to Diego and company about whether or not they would circulate petitions. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
And the Keep Tucson Together clinic is wholly supported by volunteer lawyers. We don't have any paid lawyers at all. So many of them come, you might imagine we don't have many immigration lawyers. So most of our lawyers are folks who are either retired, I'd say about 50-50 retired, or practice in other fields. And I get them up to date with immigration law.
I was thinking of people who may not be lawyers, either practicing or retired, but might be trained to be helpful for the thousands of people who are going without anybody to assist them.
Yeah. It really isn't, the forum doesn't really permit that.
Okay.
It's a very hostile forum. It's very structured and it's very hostile. Yeah. You can't, there isn't a role, for example, for friends of the court. You know, in Superior Court, well, most everybody obviously has a lawyer because they're looking at the deprivation of liberty. But some people have friends of the court that, because they're going through trauma or they're, victims or witnesses or something like that. And those people are welcomed into the court. There's no such environment like that at the in immigration court. It's very, very hostile.
All right, we have a question from Robert Butler. Go right ahead.
I wanted to know if I could get a petition copy to use at my church, Northminster Presbyterian Church. It's on Fort Lowell.
Yes, absolutely. And we'd be glad to, if you are interested and able to help us organize something like this, do a drive-by there. Or are you doing services? If your church has
we're back in person services as of Easter Sunday.
Okay, we'd be glad to, if you arrange an announcement, be in the parking lot or somewhere after church and pick up signatures. We'll give you petitions for sure, but we'd be glad to do that as well and have volunteers so people don't have to stand in line and all that.
Thank you.
Sure. Just get in touch with Martha and Myra, who I think put information in the chat. I do want to mention something that I know you all, as Democratic activists, have been in my spot before, but we're also raising money. We need help to manage this campaign. There's just no question about it. So anything that folks can do in terms of helping us with that is greatly appreciated.
All right, we have a question from Jackie Day. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, hi, and thanks for being here, Margo. I circulated your petition, maybe what was it, a year and a half ago?
Yeah.
And my question is the wording on the petition the same as it was, or has it changed? And if it's changed, how so?
It hasn't changed. And unfortunately, those thousands of signatures that we collected a year ago, we have to do all over again.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So thank you for collecting signatures.
I'll do it again.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Jackie Romer has put a question into the chat. Jackie, I wondered if you wanted to ask the question live.
Well, yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter quite a bit, and I'd like to pass on the information that I just heard. I couldn't remember it all or get it written down. So if I call the office and give you my address, can you send me what you just told us? Is that
Yes, of course.
okay?
If you just want to put Martha, the campaign manager, and Myra Silverman, one of our super volunteers, are in the chat. If you just want to put it in there, and put a little note about what you need, we'll be glad to respond.
Okay, yeah, I'll call and give you my address there.
Okay, very good.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
I was shocked to hear all this. Thank you very much. I've never heard this before. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question for you, Margo. I just looked up a news story that said that the immigration courts have a backlog of cases of something like 1.3 million cases. And what's going to happen to all of the people who are part of the surge of immigrants that have come across in March, for example?
Oh, God.
That's a good question. So let me give you a couple of tiered kind of response to that. You know, during Obama's first term, he had his hands full with economic recovery and the healthcare work and really macro stuff. But there was a tremendous push for immigration reform. And so he began that discussion, public discussion, with several different levels of folks that were involved in immigration defense and policy construction. And then he lost to Congress. And so in his second term, he did what he could do he created DACA, and he issued policies that administratively closed removal proceedings for people who were not deemed a priority. And the people that were deemed a priority were people for whom there was no relief under the law. And those were people that, for example, had aggravated felony convictions, and there was no way they could stay. And those people were left in removal. Essentially, everybody else's case was closed. But when it's admin closed, it doesn't mean it's terminated. It's not finished. It just means it's paused. And then the new administration came and reopened thousands of those cases. So a significant number of those cases are from the Obama era that are now being reopened. And then, of course, the enforcement policies, and you all remember and early on in the last administration, you'd see these thug jump out squads with, police written across their chest when they weren't police, they were ICE or Border Patrol, and, drag people away and do job site raids and all that kind of stuff. All those people were put in removal on top of all the cases that were reopened from the Obama era. And people were stopped, in Pima County. The police department, especially under the current chief, would not ask anybody's status. And if you're driving, for example, and you're stopped by a police officer and ask for your driver's license, and you don't have a driver's license, you get a ticket for not having a driver's license, and you get a ticket for whatever you did, rolling stop sign violation, whatever it is. But you're not asked status. On the contrary, in the sheriff's department, if it's the same scenario and you roll through a stop sign, you're not asked anything about the stop sign or where's your driver's license. It is where's your immigration documents, if you're a brown-skinned person, and particularly if you don't speak English. That's the number one question. And so during the last administration, the sheriff's department became an enforcement arm for ICE and Border Patrol. And most of the referrals that we saw in Pima County were not coming from ICE or BP, they were coming from the Pima County Sheriff, who then immediately called ICE or Border Patrol. And it could be, we saw things so insignificant as a rosary hanging from the rear view mirror, things like that. And so that generated a whole lot of new cases that really should never be in removal proceedings in the first place. because there are parallel systems here. There's a whole administrative system that people can apply, file an application for an asylum, or to immigrate a parent, or get DACA, or something like that. And then there's the system set up to remove people from the United States. You can file the same kind of applications, but the purpose of the immigration court is to remove, not to grant a benefit. And so we have this huge mixture of backlog cases that really don't let the courts focus on priorities. And those priorities should be, in my view, people for whom there's no relief. In other words, somebody has done something that has put them in a category that there's no relief from removal that can keep them here. And we shouldn't use the courts as the forum for when you could immigrate your mother or father, for example. You do it in the context of an adversarial deportation hearing. You ought to be able to do that in the administrative process. So what does the current presentation, how does it fit into this? Well, let me just say, as someone who was involved in the creation of the sanctuary movement way back in the 70s, and I organized the first in-detention defense project in the United States in El Centro, California at that time. There were only 5 detention facilities in the whole country, if you can imagine that. And it was filled with asylum seekers, primarily from El Salvador, and then a little bit later from Guatemala. I find I'm very offended when we read in the press or we hear reports about a surge, and as if President Biden has somehow opened a door and now everybody's running to America. The conditions that folks imagine for a minute, what would it take in any of our lives for us to take off with no money in our pocket with the people we love and try to walk 2,000 or 3,000 miles? Ask yourself that. Would it take a family member being tortured in front of you? Would it take, 2 hurricanes in a row that buried your house? Would it take your neighbor being tortured and cut up in pieces and thrown in the yard? Or people brutally murdered on your street? I mean, what would it take? I suggest our thresholds for what it would take are much lower than those that I've described. And those are the people that are coming. Now, the other thing that happened during the last administration, which we really have to understand and put in context, is, the administration closed the border. There are 2 ways that you can apply for asylum in the United States. You present yourself at the port, you knock on the door, and you say, I want to apply for asylum. Here's my story. Here's why. You are admitted. And after the Central American Wars of the late 70s and early 80s, we created something called Asylum Officers, who are specially trained, and they interview these people, and they make a determination about whether or not they fit criteria under American law to be admitted as asylees. It's an administrative proceeding. People that walk through the desert and come to apply for asylum are interviewed and can also be released to go through the administrative proceeding, or they can file an application before an immigration judge. And often those people will put in removal, and often those people will be detained. But what we're seeing now is the phenomena of, for the last 2.5 or 3 years of the prior administration, people were pooled at the border. So thousands of people could not return to their countries of origin for the reasons that I described, and you all know what they are, many, many other ones. They couldn't return. They had no choice. So they're pooled at the Mexican border. And finally, when someone comes who is going to obey the law, and allow people to apply for asylum through the administrative process, those ones that were given initial hearings were admitted. But then there was all the second wave that hadn't even been given hearing dates under the previous administration and forced to wait outside the country. And so what you see is an accumulation of people that should have been processed during the previous administration. And then you have people that continue to come for the reasons that I've described. As I say, I find the term and the concept of the surge being really, really offensive, because if any of us were in the position of the folks that are fleeing horrific conditions, life-threatening conditions, I think that we would view it as the humanitarian crisis that it is and try to figure out some intervention strategies that respect human rights, and also in the context of the integrity of our country, who we are and what we stand for and what we can accommodate. But the presentation at the southern border at this moment is very, very complex. I'm sorry for rambling, but it's, it reminds me in so many ways of the Central American wars of the 70s. And one must reflect, when will we ever be able to figure out and apply successfully intervention strategies that relieve this suffering?
I've got a question for you, Margo. As you know, President Biden issued several executive orders regarding immigration. My favorite one is he ended the so-called crisis at the border and the state of emergency so that we wouldn't be building the wall anymore. But a lot of them addressed, one executive order directs the administration to address the root causes of migration in Central America. So my question is this a step in the right direction? And is there more that can be done?
I think that's a must do step. Now, there's kind of two major factors that send people north. One of them is climate and weather. And that, I suppose that the world's great scientists can come together and try and figure out some intervention strategies to deal with that. That really seems to me to be, I guess there's some short-term strategies, but that's a fairly long-term engagement. But the other one is more troubling. I don't think that it's not something that can be addressed, but it is quite difficult. And that is the fact that definitely in Mexico and certainly in Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvador, those governments are controlled by the drug trade. And so how is it that you take apart that relationship? I mean, part of the other side of that equation is that 95% of that product comes to the United States. And so what do we do about that? That if there isn't a market for the product, then the product, I think, shifts gears into something else. But those four countries are extremely dangerous, and the government, it's just, we can't be fooled. We can't believe that those are independent governments, that run those countries. They're not. They're absolutely controlled by criminal organizations. I represented the fellow who was the city magistrate in Iguala, Guerrero, Mexico, the night that the 43 students were disappeared. And he was in the police station the night that they supposedly were taken to the police station, and supposedly, as the government line was, It was police officers that took them off, and they've never been heard from since. And in his asylum application, I got him out of Mexico. And in his asylum application, his case took 5.5 years, by the way. It was very clear that it was the Army acting at the direction of the cartel person in that particular area that took these kids, and they haven't been heard from since. And the information was that they were buried on the airbase there in Iguala. And of course, no one was ever able to search from the military base. So I just share that with you because the whole government, my client was charged with the 43 murders, and Mexico issued an Interpol red notice. And those murders, those charges stand to this day, and the Interpol red notice stands to this day, even though the United States granted him asylum. And so when you have that level of complicity, I think that there are interventions that area governments can come together to think of on a regional kind of basis. But these are really difficult presentations to try and figure out how to dismantle. And of course, the other side of that equation is the consumption in the United States.
Susie Anderson, you have a question. Go right ahead.
Yeah, we've got a number of mixed immigration status families living in Tucson. How dangerous is it for them? I mean, during the Trump administration, they arrested men taking their children to school. But since Biden, we thankfully at least haven't seen any of that. And hopefully that is not going to be an issue. But how dangerous is it for their families when they do have this mixed immigration status of one or two individuals in a family?
Well, you know, immigration is always controlled by the political moment, wholly controlled by the political moment. And during the immigration is always controlled by the political moment. And so during the last political moment, the last administration, it was horrific. You know, you ask a very complicated question, and the reason is that the undersecretaries, like Chief Magnus, for example, being nominated to head up the enforcement branch, none of those people have been confirmed yet. So all of the people in the lower levels are holdovers from the last administration. And then there is a lot of resistance from the troops in the field to changing the position. So we don't see as much ferocious kind of enforcement as we did before, but we see a lot of resistance and a lot of non-cooperation, a lot of non-communication, taking the hardest position in immigration court. And it's the same situation at the immigration court and Board of Immigration Appeals level. Those people who there are their immediate policy supervisors also are not in place. They're all holdovers. And so we see the kind of rancor that we saw in the previous administration. So it's going to take a little bit of time. And, the lesson I learned in the Obama 2 terms was if it doesn't happen quick in the first term, you run out of time. And I was always one, I thought, goodness gracious, 4 years, that's a long time. And 8 years, that's really a long time. It's no time at all. And so the extent that those appointments are held up in the Senate is a really big deal. It's a really big deal. And it affects everything that the positions, the policies, the program, what's a priority in enforcement, what's not, all of that.
All right, we have time for one last question from Shirley Muni. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I hope it's quick. If someone has been living in the country for a while and decides to voluntarily go through the administrative procedure for regulation and normalization, does his case get automatically turned over to the immigration court?
It wouldn't in this moment, it would have in the previous administration. In other words, it's discretionary. It doesn't have to. But that's why it's important to have like community clinics like Keep Tucson Together, out there so that people can come in and ask and say, hey, here's my situation. Can I apply for something? Instead of going to most of my colleagues who practice immigration law are fine, upstanding lawyers. Some are not. Some take advantage of people's vulnerability. So they'll charge a lot of money and give them bad advice. You really need to have a place that doesn't sell information, that sells goodwill. That's all they give. And so you look at your case and you say, okay, I wouldn't do it now, or I would do it now. And yes, you're eligible, or no, you're not. Wait until the end of the summer. Let's see if Congress passes the president's immigration reform bill.
Margo, we're out of time, and I wondered if you could wrap up the meeting for us. Tell us once again how we can support you and what we can do for your petition drive.
Well, let me just say thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. We need people to circulate petitions. Like I said, if you don't feel like you can circulate a petition, I'm sure that 6 or 7 or 10 people who are registered voters. Please get one. We don't mind if you send it back and it has some blank spaces. Invite us to come to events like your church or any social club or anything else, any other kind of group that you're having. We can do it in a safe way. If folks are precinct committee people, we're working precinct by precinct. Tell us, I'm a precinct committee person in this one. I'd be glad to work with y'all when you're in my precinct. And anybody who can either make a contribution or do a little event or ask your church for a contribution or your group or something like that, it all helps.
All right, folks, we've run out of time. I appreciate everybody attending, and I want to especially thank Margo Cowan for presenting at our meeting. And we look forward to seeing you at the next DGT meeting. And that's the end of this meeting. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Rochella.